When did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
And welcome everybody to, I believe it is 102, the 102nd episode of House of Asher, and we're going to get into something that's kind of different for me. I have watched a lot of sci-fi and heard a lot of different people's recounts of different things. I've even saw a few oddball things in the sky. Nothing to really write home about, but that's something that we are going to get into. That's somebody that really has had an extremely curious life and very wonderfully decorated military man, and it's going to get kind of different, guys. So settle in, and you're going to have some fun. I do need to make sure to mention that you're probably listening to this possibly on Spreaker. You may be listening to this on iHeart. It's just a whole bunch of different formats. Spotify, also on the Paranormal UK radio network, which is kind enough to carry us around the globe and into your homes, wherever that may be. I want to welcome everybody and thank you again so much. And I'm going to do like a real quick little bio here. Jason Gleaves. Now, this gentleman was joined the Royal Air Force at 17 years old. You know, this guy has had a very long and decorated career with the RAF, stationed in many different places. And I want to touch on things about his new book, UFO Photos, Computer Analysis of Worldwide UFO Images Through the Decades. And I guess I'll just go ahead and welcome you on. Hey, Jason, how are you?
Hi, Steve. Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. You know, something I was looking at too, and it's so strange, and I want to really get into some of these different aspects, which also, I guess before I really get into that, will you throw out your webpage and how people can get a hold of you and whatnot? If I'm sure they may want to reach you after the interview.
Yeah, if anybody needs to contact me or regarding UFO sightings, anything similar to that, I've got a couple of media pages through Facebook, Twitter, etc., called UF Only, and you can contact me on there. And if you leave a message, I will get back. I do get inundated with messages and people asking for me to analyse photographs for them. But if you just hang in there, I will get back to you.
That's awesome. And, you know, it's so strange because, like you said, once you kind of become that guy, you know, that's where a lot of times people, it's just by nature, you know, people go, well, you know what you're looking at. So, and I guess that sort of, you know, I guess that can be sort of an honor, but I'm sure that's got to be tiring.
Yeah, well, people approach me from all over the world with sightings, and to be fair, many of the sightings that I analyse and images and videos I look at for them, they are explainable. They are, you know, aircraft just slightly in different weather conditions or a different environment. So when you get down to the real nitty-gritty of the analysing of the image, and quite often you can tell the person that, you know, it's something explainable. But there is the small percentage, obviously, that isn't explainable, and it's unidentified.
Right. Well, you know, and the thing is, if I'm not mistaken, your story goes further back. I mean, you've had sort of bizarre encounters before this. I mean, even before your encounters in the Royal Air Force, if memory serves right.
Yeah, going way back. This is way before my Air Force days, and like you said, when I was 7 years old in Liverpool, with my sister, I had an encounter of a flying disc. It was a silver disc-shaped object, which was over Liverpool, where we lived at the time. And my sister's slightly older than me. We were just playing innocently upstairs in our relative's house near Aintree Racecourse, which is a big holds a big race there every year called the Grand National. Everybody watches that in the UK and probably worldwide. And yeah, we were just playing innocently, and out of the window of the upstairs, this illuminated disc was outside the window. We watched it, and then it flew off at high velocity, and then we just carried on playing as if nothing had happened. And I'd forgotten about the incident most of my life earlier on with that. It was my sister that reminded me of it, and slowly things have come back to me, over time.
Well, that's, I will I won't bore people with mine because it was so innocuous. But I'll throw it to you because maybe you might have some insight. I was a teenager, again, kind of like yourself, playing with some friends. Watched a object go, what I thought was just a very large cloud, going over the moon. It was not super late. It was enough. The moon was up probably, above the horizon. It was enough to see it. So anyway, and this thing went across. I thought it was just like a really dense cloud. It was almost not cigar shaped, but more like a potato of all things. Just kind of a thicker in the center, but just didn't look anything impressive. Didn't have the big lights out of Close Encounters or anything, right? So here it goes, and we're watching it. And it just seems sort of strange. And as it went toward the moon, to the right side of it, I didn't see it anymore. And I was like, wow, I figured that would have dulled the moon out. It looked, somewhat solid. And we waited for it to pass and go through. But as it kept going, it literally disappeared. So I don't know if it did sort of a slight turn, turned its nose and went in behind the moon and out straight. We watched it, and that might have happened. I'm trying to think. That might have been, 45 seconds, a minute and a half tops. But it seemed like by the time everything was said and done, 4 or 5 minutes had passed. So either our watching of time was different. I've heard different people go, well, maybe you lost time, and it's just I don't remember any sort of interaction. So, do you get that type of encounter more, or do you have more people going, oh, well, there was this, and they had antenna, and all the different, whole miles of different types of stories? Which is most common?
It's pretty even, really. I get a lot of people contacting me because really they want to know what they've seen. It's niggling them that much that they need to know. And as I've said before, I call it the Richard Dreyfuss syndrome, where people are digging and looking for answers, and it becomes frantic to know what they've seen. But when people contact me, they contact me with encounters of ETs, entities, manifesting extraterrestrials, anything orbs, but obviously the aerial aircraft or unknown aircraft, UFOs. And again, you get disc-shaped, elongated shaped, cylindrical, also known as cigar-shaped, like a rod. And more lately, you get more of the orbs. People seem to be contacting me with more images of orbs, which are shown around the chemtrails and things like that.
Well, do you think... Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt what you were saying. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
No, I was just curious that, some of the earliest things were documented were like the Foo Fighters, almost look like what I would call an elementals, fiery type images and just darting around with tails and all that kind of stuff. You had mentioned rods, and I remember for a while that was a very hot topic. Are these some sort of life form? Are they natural to the planet? Are they, extraterrestrial? Do you have either any insight on it, or do you have a theory on any of that?
But the relation to the flame rods, you've generally people are seeing those in an outside environment or something, and they actually travel faster than the eye can see. They're only really caught on camera images. At the odd time, you'll get the odd one. I did one for Solaris Blue Raven not so long ago, when she had an interview, and there was one in the house or where she was conducting her interview. I think they're a bit of an unknown quantity, really, because they're just an unknown maybe an unknown species that we haven't discovered as such yet, whether they come off-world, live in our orbit, or live just within the atmosphere itself. But I have got quite a few images of flying orbs.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Solaris.
Sorry, flying rods.
Right. Well, it's funny you mentioned Solaris. She was one of the first people that helped me out, especially once I first started getting out and doing books and promoting and all that. And very, very knowledgeable lady, very sweet lady. Now, in the times that you've done this, because like you said, were you doing the research while you were in the Air Force, or was this like something once you'd left service, or was that something that, and if so, was that something you chose to do because it might affect your career, or was it a thing of going, I just don't have time to investigate?
Generally, I got more into. I've always been interested in ufology throughout my life, and we're going back to the early days. Star Wars came out, and people's interest gained even more because of the sci-fi element. I've always been interested in watching Arthur C. Clarke, the author and scientist. He had programs out, unexplained programs. I used to buy the Unexplained magazines, and I always had a healthy interest in the subject. With the other encounters, they seem to just happen going through my life, and then obviously when I joined the military, things happened there too. And then the later, when I was on base at a base called RAF Cosford in the Midlands in the UK, and during March of 1993, a huge triangular-shaped craft came down over the base there, and it's documented. I wrote about it in my first book, UFO Photo, and Nick Pope, who was working on the UK X-Files desk in Whitehall at the time, he actually came out the day later to investigate what had happened. And basically what happened, there was a young guard on the gate guard at RAF Cosford on the airfield, which is an entrance gate going on. He was there on his own, and this was early hours of the morning. And in the guard room itself, the radio started to go off with this young lad who was obviously on the guard post on his own, witnessing this huge black triangle which came down silently over the base, over the airfield itself. So all the guard commander and the rest of the RAF military police and the other guards got to the guard post as quick as they could. When they got there, they saw this large black triangular-shaped craft, which was also described at the time to be the size of a battleship. It was huge.
Jesus.
And then it took off at high velocity. But on that same night, throughout the whole of the UK, in certain locations, there was other descriptions of a large triangle craft seen throughout that area, and also recorded when the black triangle accelerated away. It went straight to another RAF base, which was about 20 miles away, which is RAF Shawbury. And it was actually seen there by an on-duty air traffic controller on the base, and they witnessed this huge triangle of similar description. Whether it was the same craft or not, but it was of similar description, came in and over the airbase, firing lasers down at the ground. So it's a really documented account that happened.
I wonder, because there's like the Bob Lazar story and things like that, and they talk about as you know, in the U.S. we have was it S4, and we have the Area 51 and all kinds of different locations, and I know England, Russia, all these different countries have their own Area 51, or whatever they want to call it. You're saying this thing was shooting lasers. I'm sitting there wondering, because my first question was, do you think it's ours? And then I'm thinking, well, why would you be shooting on your own bases? What do you think that was about? I mean, do you think that was maybe testing capabilities? What could that have been?
Yeah, it possibly could be one of our secret covert aircraft, whether it be, English, American, anybody else, but, it was certainly unknown. It was nothing we had or we were using at the time, in our defence of the UK. But it's when the triangle-shaped craft is seen a lot, and it's all through different phases, through different decades, I should say. It's generally through the 90s there was a lot of triangle-shaped craft seen. So whether that goes back to the covert craft, whether they go through decades of building and then they'll move on to the next phase of what they're actually flying. I'm in two minds really to if it's ours or whether it's unknown. It's still a pretty open question, really.
Well, again, like you were talking about Arthur C. Clarke and a lot of those shows like the In Search Of program, that was really big here in the U.S. And, all the stuff that ties in with that. And, I want to throw this out kind of tongue in cheek. You're like, well, is it ours or is it theirs? And I said, maybe it's, a combination, it's not, maybe it's an amalgamation of the two.
Yep.
Did you ever have anything like that in your country? And because again, full disclosure, I'm not as knowledgeable on UFOs as I am of certain other subjects.
Like I said, yeah.
My thing is, you've heard the stories. I believe it was Eisenhower that supposedly had an interview or sat down with some type of entity from another world. Like you think of like the day the Earth stood still.
Yeah.
Is there any stories of like, say, Winston Churchill or one of your great leaders that had encounters with or set downs, maybe even had some sort of negotiative thing and understanding, because I've heard stories that, again, because, I'm sort of outside looking in on this, that sometimes they would allow them to come over towns and, take cattle and do things like cattle mutilations and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Do you, think that there have ever been any sort of backroom dealings with those sort of entities? And also, what about the things like the cattle mutilations and things like that? Have you had your fair share of that in your area in your time of researching?
Yeah, I'm sure any heads of state or anybody in governments will have sort of a dealing. Whether not, I haven't come across it personally, anything like that, and I have heard of Eisenhower when he had the I think it was during the 1950s at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and it was said that they had a meeting and whatever was discussed they didn't agree on, but it was more to the fact of passing technology across, but in exchange that the ETs wanted to have an abduction program going. But one thing stated at the time was that anybody abducted wouldn't remember the abduction. They'd have their memory erased of that incident. Winston Churchill, I think, had a great interest. There's been letters that have been banded around for years, and anyone can see these letters. They're on the internet, and he actually brought the question forward to investigate its sightings and things like that. The things with abductions and with the animal mutilations, really, this new book I've just brought out, I think it's going to be released on the 1st of June or July through Philip Mantle and Flying Disc Press, but it's called the Ufology Umbrella. And in that book, I tried to break down the seven categories of close encounters. Everyone's heard of Close Encounters of the Third Kind because of the Steven Spielberg film, but if you break them all down, there's 7 categories in total where you can go over them, and it breaks down everything like we've just said, from abduction, sightings, cattle mutilations, anything like that really, and also I think it's CE7, which is the most controversial encounter, in which a human and an ET mate, and it's sexual intercourse, artificial insemination, so it to produce a hybrid being.
I've had different people, doing this show for, probably, a year, going on a year and a half, and I never know what to say because my life experience is not their life experience. Okay, and you know how it is. You see in popular media, whatever joke, something about UFOs, and there's jokes about being probed, and it's just a big laugh, and that's horrifying, to think that you've possibly went through something like that, which I don't know in regards to the sexual component of it. There was a guy, I'm trying to remember his name, and he did all this artwork. I think it was like Love and Flying Saucers or something like that was the name of it.
Yeah.
And did this very intricate artwork, and it was different. It was really kind of quirky, but I think maybe that was just his way of coping with certain things. Have you interviewed people that claim to have that? And what was their takeaway? Is it a thing of like they felt very violated, or was it a thing more of they felt like they were part of something that was bigger than them? I mean, I wonder how they coped and sort of digested all that.
Yeah, I've interviewed people that have had similar experiences to that. Also, I mean, a lot of the people don't want their name brought out, or they don't want any publicity or anything like that. Really, they just want answers to what's happened to them, or somebody answering questions. They seem to have a lot of questions. Over time, you get a lot of people. They've never met each other, obviously, but they all come out with the same things. The same things that have happened in their experiences, or whether it be greys or mantid or reptilian or any type of entity being, and being taken on ships, examined, and the mode of transport to get to and fro. A lot of things match up and this is worldwide. This is people from all over the globe who come forward with the same things but have never met. So that says something for a start. Also, you get people, obviously, where they'll have the sightings with the images, and then, you will analyse the photographs for them, and whether it be real or not, It just gets back really to the end-all story is it unidentified or not? And with the abductions, what's really going on,
Okay. Well, something I'm wondering too is because, I'm the youngest of seven. I'm not sure how many kids are in your family, and I'm 49, but my parents were Depression era parents, and it was a lot of that. You did your thing, and you were pretty kind of a cut and dry type person. There was not a lot of room for fanciful this and that. When you guys had your experiences, especially as young people with you and your siblings, obviously you're the one who's out more publicly with it. Is your family more like, yeah, I don't really want to get into it publicly, or is it more of a thing that you just kind of spearheaded it, or maybe they do have their own sort of thing out there? And the reason I ask this is, I know there's a lot of times there's different people that might have a brother or a sister that had almost the exact same experiences, but for whatever reason, it's kind of that fight or flight response. You don't know until you're there, and some people can absorb that, and instead of it scaring them to death, they go, I wanted to learn what that was. I wanted to discover that. Is that sort of what happened with yours, with your kind of family situation? I mean, if I can ask.
Yeah. Like I said, it started really going way back with my sister. So ever since then, it's sort of been on the back burner. I mean, I never knew I was going to join the Air Force, obviously, but throughout things have happened, and I've brought other things out regarding my family. That we talk about things like that, but it was only not long ago, maybe a year or two ago, when I was actually going through the second book when I was preparing it to put forward. My father's ex-army himself, so he's ex-military, and he said that when he was a young boy, he had an encounter with a man in black. That it came through his front door when he was only, I can't remember how old he was at the time, but I've wrote about it in the book. I've done an illustration of what he saw and when we sat down and went through everything. And when I showed the illustration to my father, he was sort of taken back because he said, that's exactly what I saw, So I just really went off what he told me. But he was playing in my grandparents' house as a young boy. This is, I think it was the 1950s. They didn't have a TV, just had a radio because obviously they weren't widely available then. And he was playing in the hallway, running up and down like he used to in the evening. As he ran back into the hallway, he said he looked forwards down this long hall towards the front door, which was all padlocked up for the night and, bolted up. And he said as he ran into the hallway, he saw this tall, dark figure literally walk straight through the front door and stood there and beckoned to him to go up the stairs. And obviously he didn't. He panicked, did an about turn, ran back into the living room where my grandparents were, and they sort of poo-pooed it and said, "Oh no, you obviously imagined it," and things like that. But as I went through with him and we got into more detail, he said this figure was tall, dark, had a suit on with a tie and a trilby hat. So that was surreal when he brought that forward to me.
Yeah. That was another thing I was going to ask, because like you said, who knows how far it went back, and maybe your grandparents, for whatever reason, did not have an encounter, but it does seem like, I don't know if it's bloodlines, I don't know what it is, but it does seem like a lot of times when people start talking about it, there's going to be an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, or somebody who had similar experiences. And, it really makes me wonder if it's just a giant genetic experiment or something, or maybe certain people are more tuned in to whatever vibrational plane. Because if you're able to kind of transmute and pass through a closed door, because I thought when you meant Men in Black, I thought you meant like, like the Will Smith movie, like guys showing up with shades, and like from we're here from the government. We need to talk about what you saw, but you're talking about the guys that aren't quite guys. The people that aren't quite human.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. I would have freaked out too.
Well, it took him a while to come out and bring this forward and say this. I mean, I go out at night at Skywatch. I can see craft all the time coming over, and I know that, they're not satellites, they're not aircraft, because I know what I'm looking at. There's no strobe lights or anything, landing lights on the aircraft, which is, the mandatory to be on aircraft through international aviation law.
Right.
The whole reason for strobes on an aircraft are for you to see the aircraft, and they're there for no other reason. It's not for the aircraft. It's so nothing obviously runs into it in flight. And I've got all the apps like everybody else, which are free to everybody, and you can see that there are no satellites or anything above. And where I live is a small village near Chester, and it's actually, I didn't realise till after it's a ley line. I actually live on a ley line, which is a direct energy to somewhere through the whole UK. And there's an old monastery here in the village where it goes back a long time, and I think it was Edward I stayed here twice. So there's a lot of history and everything going back, so I think that's got a lot to do with certain sightings and energy and things like that as well.
I just want to remind everybody we were talking with Jason Gleaves. We were touching on his lifelong experiences with UFOs and up through his time in the Royal Air Force. Reason I asked this because I grew up like a lot of Americans, loving British music. Obviously Liverpool, the Beatles, and also like Birmingham. Black Sabbath. I was a really big Black Sabbath fan. Was The reason I'm telling you this is, do you find that certain music, certain tones, certain mindsets draw the attention of these type of things? Because I've heard of different people going, "Oh, we'll go out in the desert, like in America, like Arizona,
Yeah.
okay, Nevada, which I think you not that long ago had been there, right? People go out and they set out and they have these systems, light systems, and they'll flash in whatever sort of configuration, and they swear up and down. After a while, they start getting responses in the sky, and things start coming toward the lights and being overhead. Have you encountered that, or have you experimented with anything like that?
If you go back to Liverpool, my mum, she used to go watch the Beatles in her lunch hour in the cabin before they were famous. But in relation to musicians and everything, in this new book I've wrote quite a big section on that about frequencies and everything, and the fact that a lot of musicians seem to be toned into UFOs or strange aerial or orbs, anything that's out of the ordinary. And it's really, I say, famous musicians, but that's just because they're famous. Obviously, there are musicians who are not famous, but they're still having sightings exactly the same. And I do believe they're on a different frequency with the music, that they're attuned to that type of thing, the different harmonies. And a good friend of mine, Peter Maxwell Slattery, he's Australian, and he's a musician himself. And he has a lot to do with James Gilliland, which is ESETI in near Mount Adams. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot to do with the analysing of images for people who are there. I think they've got a gathering there at the minute, so I'm expecting to get more images to come back to me. And that some of the images I get back from there are amazing, really, because you can see the craft. Again, they're not aircraft, they're not satellites or things. Other people might say they are. Without looking at the data of the satellite charts, etc., there is a slight question. But when you see the craft coming over and you see them powering up, maybe the phrase of the power up is literally where it will just give it an intense, it will just illuminate itself really large. You can go on any of their web pages and you can see all this for yourself, because they don't hold anything back. They put everything out there. So, yeah.
Well, something I was thinking was that, they've done tests. I mean, governments have done this, and they'll play certain parts of music, and they will see different parts of the brain light up with activity. And as I understand, different people who can recount their stories and encounters, be it abductions, be it whatever, have similar activity in those different regions of their brains. And I wonder, like you mentioned before, if it's, I don't want to use the term high-minded necessarily, but it's a thing where when you open yourself up to certain vibrations, it seems like that's where it's kind of amicable for both parties, and so it's strange, there's been reports this far back, early medieval times and before, recorded history. You always hear about the stories of like paintings where it looks like there's a UFO over a town or whatever, and some people go, well, no, it's the sun. I said, no, the sun's over there. This is something totally different.
Yeah.
It's
very coincidental that happens to look like a UFO, or if you go back over the ancient text, everything's similar. But with the audio thing, that side of it, you got a lot of people go on Sky Watches through Stephen Greer and Peter Slattery, James Gillian, like I said, and they go under CE5, which is Close Encounter number 5, and that's that's going back on the audible side again. So it's bilateral, contact with an ET entity or craft, and that's through some sort, through some form of audible form of communication. So, the contact can be initiated by either a human or vice versa, an ET entity being back both ways.
Well, they talk about, well, I mean, if you go back to like Close Encounters, what was one of the ways that they communicated when they used a series of kind of like mathematical points, and they put it to different music and used a scale. Because for me, being a musician myself, to me, music, everybody says, well, math is universal. You might go somewhere where they're not going to be using advanced calculus or whatever, but I guarantee they've got some form of music. I'm sure there's a few cultures maybe where everyone's mute or something or whatever, just some sort of thing that just, whatever reason, they didn't develop vocal cords or whatever, but you can still beat and bang on things, and there's communications that way. So, I mean, I think sometimes we look at things, sometimes we overthink it. And I think if you go with your gut, being like ex-law enforcement, generally that yields better results than just sitting there overthinking it. And, you even go to cultures where, music helps to induce spiritual connections with their deities or whatever. So, we're, in some ways, we're a lot further ahead than we even realize, but then sometimes we're still kind of playing with building blocks. So, it's just a really strange thing, and it's fascinating that you that you're into this, because, like I said, most people that I talk to come at it from a different direction. Yeah, maybe they're experiencers, but they don't have. I mean, it's not that they're not articulate, but it's just a thing of, just like I have a hard time explaining some of the stuff I've experienced. And when you have someone who has studied like you and has the military background, and you can really, give some legitimacy to it, it's really cool. Let me ask you this, because you always hear every year, like when there's a new election or whatever, oh, this guy, it's going to be disclosure. It's going to be disclosure this time. Do you think A, it will ever happen? And B, do you think it's going to be like a soft disclosure? Where do you think it's going to go?
Disclose, like yourself, yeah, I've heard it for forever and a day. They're going to disclose here, then. There's a rumor something's going to come out. You go back to 2012, that was going to be the date, and it was all about the Mayan calendar. And the Mayan calendar wasn't about something new. It was basically a calendar starting again. Again, the government are slowly drip feeding the populace with information about Mars, life on Mars, everything else. The planets where they're saying now that you can live, that there are planets out there, hundreds of thousands of planets that are inhabitable by humans or Earth-like. They're slowly introducing the populace on a very, very slow drip feed. Every president or whoever comes out, I don't think it's up to them to disclose. I don't think they're allowed to disclose. I think it's higher. It goes way above anything that they're going to be able to do. But if you look at it in another way, I think disclosure's already happened, because if you look at the information that's out there, the people that have had contact, there's so much information if you delve into it, because that's the way I see ufology. That's why I called the new book the Ufology Umbrella, because that's the way I see ufology in general, is like a huge umbrella, and you try and answer one question and it goes off in 100 different questions, from abductions, sightings, etc. It just goes on and on and on.
Well, and while we're on the subject of the UFO Umbrella, where can people get that book?
Yeah, that'll be released on the 1st of July through Flying Disc Press, with Philip Mantle, who's a ufologist here in the UK. Philip's been around for quite a long time and he's very experienced in the field. But it's also available on Amazon, the same as UFO Photo, the first book.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm trying to see how I'm going to broach this question because I don't want it to come off as any sort of indictment. Now, I know from coming from the side of the paranormal or whatever you want to call it, in regards of even ghost hunters and whatnot, okay? I'm an investigator. I don't hunt anything. I have no heads of ghosts on my wall. I don't use the term in my own thing. But you have different people that go, well, like you're talking about orbs. Well, this is dust. No, well, that's an artifact from a digital camera. No, this is that. No one can, there's no real baseline. And everybody has their own, which, I mean, to a point, you have to have your own theories. That's how you kind of come to conclusions and get a consensus. But
Oh, yeah.
do you find it's gotten better or it's gotten worse in regards of like ufology circles? And I'm not saying that in any way, and I'm not calling names. It just seems like certain things are, yes, that makes total sense. That is completely legitimate. And there's, a handful of things that some people swear up and down that's disinformation, or you know how it is.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of that, or you just sort of sidestep it and just do your own thing?
Well, most of the time I have done my own thing, but yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really, because with technology advancing, reference the cameras on mobile phones, etc., which are becoming more easily available to everybody, has them in a pocket. If they see something in the sky, they can take a snap, and generally that's where it's going in that respect. If you go back so many years with technology, you had the old 35mm cameras, so people saw something, if they just so happened to have a camera with them, they were lucky, they would get the photograph. You get a lot of things like that. Whether it's got better or worse, I think the sightings have actually stepped up. But also, like I said, a double-edged sword where the sightings you do get, they are explainable. Probably 90% will probably be explainable through stars, aircraft, or weather conditions. There's all kinds of things. And I hate to break the news to somebody if I analyse something and say, I'm sorry, it's this, or it's an aircraft. But then there's that small percentage where there are really good sightings and really good images, and you think to yourself, wow, that's the wow photograph, because it's unexplainable. You can't actually say what it is, whether it's a covert aircraft or a military aircraft or certainly an unknown aircraft. It still could be an aircraft, a man-made aircraft. So it's just something we don't know about. But then also we've got off-world craft that are probably visiting and conducting their business, doing whatever they're doing. So, yeah, but it's difficult to say. Difficult to say, really.
Well, it's a thing that, and again, I can only use my own experiences in regards of investigating different phenomenon. I think you got a handful of different categories of people that have had experiences. You've got some that have grew up their whole lives wanting desperately to have one. So anything they encounter, they're going to assume is whatever. Then you have some who, whatever, they can kind of take it or leave it, say, I don't know what it is. And they're kind of hoping maybe you'll say it's not. And I'm sure you probably have given relief to some people. Okay, thank God.
Yeah.
But how many times have you had the ones who either wanted it to be something so badly that they will almost become argumentative, because there's sometimes you have people that it doesn't matter who tells them, look, you can see right here, it's whatever. This, at the exact time this plane was going over, you can see the fuselage in the friggin' shot. It is what this is, and they will not believe it. And because you're kind of crushing their dreams, How many times have you had to deal with people like that?
A few times over the years, but I try not to be judgmental, because if somebody's seen something, that's their truth, whether it be unexplained or explained. It's not my job to put people down. If somebody approaches me with an image that needs to be analysed, I'll certainly help them and analyse it to the best of my ability. If I can't do it, or if there's something that's happened to them, or there's an encounter or an experience, and I'm not sure, or if I can help them, I certainly know somebody in the field who could help them. I can point them in the right direction. But you will get people, regardless of what you say, will have their own opinions and stick with it. All I can do is give the facts of, what was around at the time, the lighting, any other aircraft that were around, that could have been around at the time, any satellites. So I'm like probably every other ufologist who would go down that investigation route, would go down the basics first, and then at the end of it, if you've got something that's unexplained, you've got something unexplained. There's no if or buts.
Right. I'm thinking of like the old thing about like Occam's razor, and I'm sure maybe I'm mispronouncing that, but generally the most logical explanation is generally right. But then again, you have whatever, you have five things flying over Reno. Oh well, that's swamp gas. Okay, there's no swamps there, or oh well, there's what do they call them? Test dummies. Those aren't bodies and all that. So you hear so many stories that are so, like, if they would read it back to themselves and saying, would you believe it if I said this to you? It just seems like they're just scrambling. But time has changed. People's view, I'm not saying necessarily of the government and authority, but to a point, yes, has changed to where they automatically think they're going to be lied to. And the generation that's here now, and mine and your generation as well, there was a little bit more trust of the government back in the day, especially in our parents' day. Why would they lie to us? They're the government. They're here to look out for us, right? Yeah. But it's just in time, like you said, with the different films and the different books and all that kind of stuff, it just seems like it's changed. Let me ask you this too. Now, you hear stories of, like, we have a lot of memes and stuff. So you'll have stuff where it's talking about, like, say, President Trump, and he's talking about, Space Force, and then there's people that says, no, well, we actually already have that. We've had that for a while. We have bases on the other side of the moon. We have places, bases on Mars. We have intergalactic, interdimensional travel. How much of that do you feel is possible, factual, and how much of that is just fanciful?
I think with the Space Force is just the military, especially the American military and government, coming forward with what's already been there. And it's been publicised through ufology for many years now about a secret space fleet and force. Because, you've got your it'd be the sixth force, because you've got the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard. Mm-hmm. And sixth force will be the Space Force. If you go back to the Gary McKinnon, who was the UK NASA hacker many years ago, and he hacked in and he actually discovered the space fleet and all the crew members and things like that, and so it's been there. They've did a long time really, and everybody wants the dominance of space. That's the be all end all. That's what it's about. It's if we don't do it, somebody else will. And if you go back to Russia have had a space force as early as 1992. So you go back and they disbanded it, I think, in 97 and then restarted again 2001. So it's not a new thing. It's just a new thing to Joe Public. They're trying to introduce the drip feed effect. So when you actually come to talk about the the Space Force or Space Fleet or anything regarding this, it'll just become the norm to everybody.
Well, do you think, and like I said, I'm sorry if I'm throwing a lot of different little questions at you, but it's just how they come to me.
All right, yeah.
Obviously, if there are things that are going on and things that are already established that we're just kind of getting, like you said, drip feed into, how possible do you think there is already a breakaway civilization? Do you think we've already had births on these other planets? And do you think, because I always was sort of under the belief of, because you talk about the Greys, you talk about, there's all kinds of different ones, the one that were like the Nordics and stuff.
Yeah.
I always assumed that at least some of those were who maybe seeded us here. And I wonder how much of that is, again, a genetic saving program due to the fact that maybe something happened, that they lost some component in their genetics so far ahead. I'm just curious why. Why would they care about us? Everybody goes, the Earth is so beautiful, it's so perfect, but there's so many planets, an untouched place, because we've done a number on it,
Why here? Why Earth? Why this Earth?
Right.
Like you said, there are plenty other planets out there that we know of now, and are knowing more and more as the years and months go by. There's something special about the Earth, and it's got a lot of history, and it goes way, way back, way before anything we know about. And you go back to the ancient texts, and it just goes way back. Things are coming forward with that. People I've heard say that Earth is just a zoo where ET likes to come and see us as the animals in the zoo, just like we would go to a zoo to see a giraffe, a lion. It's something exotic. I've heard that. Again, I've heard, like you've just said yourself there, it's about DNA, missing DNA. Mary Rodwell, who's really good in her field, looks into the children and their side, and where they basically, they're remembering past lives on Earth and off-world. It's that umbrella again. It's literally, you can talk about one thing and it'll go off so many different directions.
Well, and the thing, I actually there's a British series, I believe it's Black Mirror, and they touch on a lot of different things about parallel, not just universes but timelines. So we're talking about, this Earth, which this Earth, if it's. Are there multiples in different timelines? Is that how we're getting crossovers? Because I've heard people, speak of that, obviously again, like we talked about the Greys and the Nordics and the Reptilians and all those guys. And then people want to throw Bigfoot on it. And I know some people's going, wait a minute, come on, man, why are you going? But there's people that say because it can travel interdimensionally, it can appear, it can disappear, and if you look in things like, which I don't know how much you've read on guys like Crowley, stuff like that. He talked about having, alien or spirit guide type help, touching on, the old stories of fairies and wee people and stuff like that, that they were actually extraterrestrials. So, and why not? A lot of the things of people getting spirited away through their bedroom windows. The windows aren't open. They go right through the windows. That sounds just like an abduction to me.
It does with me when you listen to experiences into certain things like that, and you just cross-reference to abductions. They're very, very similar. And again, you go back through all famous people in the past, Tesla, you go down that road of, I'm sure they had help, they were getting some sort of readings or some sort of dreams or help with what they needed to know to carry on to the next step.
Right.
I mean, you can go back to, it's like the electromagnetic spectrums, which are the wavelengths which we see craft. You go down that route of, you've got radio waves, microwaves, and infrared. but you've got naturally visible ultraviolet, soft and hard X-rays and gamma rays. It's what you can visibly see with craft, and it's whether they want you to see the craft as well. So that interaction, do they want you to see it? Do they not? Are you ready to see it?
Well, and that's bringing me to one of my last questions, is that, what do you feel? I mean, is it a thing that, because it seems like in the last few years that the discussion of radio shows, television shows, books, movies, groups are popping up, different, and it's all about, UFOs and disclosure and what's coming next. And, I knew there was a report back in the day where they speculated that the stock market would crash, that people would be committing suicide if they didn't feel that there was a God, as they know God, out there. And, they just said, we need to sit on this because it's going to cause mass hysteria and a loss of life. Where do you think we are now with that? I mean, are we really that much further advanced now with that, or do you still think we're going to have people nosediving out of buildings and poisoning your kids and all that?
Yeah, I personally don't think it's going to go that way, but I've heard of it like yourself. Nobody really knows how the human populace are going to react to something like this. And you can go back to the Vatican. They've said already that they would baptize aliens and extraterrestrials. This is a while ago.
Yeah.
So to the drip or feed effect. But with the world in general, it's really about the economy and everything else, because once you let the cat out of the bags, so to speak, you're talking about petrol, gas, oil, and then you'd be thinking, well, why do we need this? We should be running on free energy. We've never needed this. So a lot of things will collapse. But then, again, it's disclosure will happen. It's got to happen. Right. Eventually, it's got to happen.
Right. And it seems that, like you said, things happen and things go in waves. Things are connected much more to nature than people think. You drop a rock, it's going to have some sizable ripples, but it will steady itself. A wave will rise, a wave will fall. I'm not trying to sound deep, but it's just the nature of it. And people do that too. There was stuff that was. I remember when everybody was losing their mind about like anthrax. Everybody was losing their mind about ISIS, and then they went on to another big bad. Yeah. And but I will say this: I remember Tesla talking about his inventions is that more or less that he had help from almost something unworldly, unearthly, and he never really got into it deeper than that I know of. But I mean, that's telling, for someone with his background. You never heard Edison say that. He claimed he made everything, especially stuff he didn't. And if we had maybe have had that chance, because some people speculated maybe Tesla was either a hybrid or something like that. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, with technology like that, I've heard Stephen Greer say this a long time ago, that there are over 5,000 plus patents for free energy devices that have been taken, away
and shelved
from the public. Yeah, and shelved.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a big hangar somewhere, like you see in the Indiana Jones films, where it goes on and on and on, and there's boxes stacked high. I'm pretty sure there are places like that everywhere.
I'm sure. Well, Jason, we're at the end of this. I want to thank you for being on, and if you'll stick around after my outro, I'd like to talk to you if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. I've enjoyed myself.
Thank you, sir. Everybody, Jason Gleaves. Make sure to tune in next week. We're going to have some other stuff going on, but until then, enjoy your time with your family, love yourselves, and get out there and have fun. But until next time, check under your bed, check your closet. Don't be afraid to be a little afraid, because there's learning there. So until next time, my friends, goodbye.